I took a trip back in time and simulated a dinosaur ecosystem. In these lands live some of the largest creatures to ever walk the earth. From towering sauropods to the giants of the sky, and finally to the terrifying hybrid dinosaurs that knew no boundaries. For 100 relentless days, I simulated their world. A savage landscape where the line between predator and prey constantly shifted. This isn't just science, but this is survival on the scale that the Earth hasn't seen in 70 million years. Welcome to the deadliest dinosaur ecosystem ever created. And to tell you this story, I'm going to have to take you back to day one. Welcome to day one, on none other than Isla Sorna, also known as Site B, the secret dinosaur breeding and cloning facility used by InGen to create some of the most interesting creatures, let's just say. I started day one by preparing the groundwork of this ecosystem, which would be environments suitable for them to live in. I added some small hills and a long snaking river that ran right through the heart of our ecosystem. After adding some brief foliage, some trees and some rocks, we were finally ready to introduce our first creature. And we weren't starting small. The first creature introduced to our ecosystem was the Titanosaurus. Titanosaurus was a genus of sauropod dinosaur that lived during the late Cretaceous period about 70 million years ago, in what is now India. It belonged to the Titanosauria group, a clade of huge long-necked plant-eating dinosaurs that includes some of the largest animals to ever walk the earth. The Titanosaurs were getting settled into their new habitat and expanding their territory. When you're as large as a Titanosaur, luckily you don't have to worry about too many dangers, for now at least. I named a couple of our Titanosaurs, such as Littlefoot over here, and then added some tall fibre to keep them happy, and also fed, as that is what they mainly feed on. It was then time to introduce our second creature, and we led with an old favourite, the Triceratops. This iconic Cretaceous dinosaur would be a great addition to our ecosystem, and they had a big herd of them, with babies included, led by the alpha known as Broken Horn. I named up Broken Horn and then watched our Triceratops wander over to the lake, as they were clearly thirsty after their migration. While I watched our Triceratops and Titanosaurs have a nice peaceful drink together, I decided to come up with a name for this area of our ecosystem, and after much thought, I decided to name it Big Lake. I could already see Big Lake becoming a future battleground site, as dinosaurs, predator and prey were both lured in. With two creatures now introduced to our ecosystem, it was beginning to feel alive, but to make it fully functioning, we were going to need a predator. Introducing the Spinosaurus. This is Taily and Saily, our first predators to be introduced to our ecosystem. Spinosaurus is the first known semi-aquatic dinosaur, and it likely lived around rivers, lakes and mangroves, feeding mostly on fish. Luckily our water had plenty of fish in for them, so for now they would be satisfied. Would they be tempted by the Titanosaurs located just down the river at the Big Lake? We would have to wait and see. But first I've got to tell you about today's sponsor, Stumble Guys. So for the release of Jurassic World Rebirth, Stumble Guys have partnered up with Universal to bring dinosaurs to Stumble Guys. I'm sure most of you are familiar with Stumble Guys, it's a game that we've all played, but now it's gone full on Jurassic. They've introduced some crazy dinosaur levels such as Dino Dash, Mesozoic Mosh, and my personal favourite, Jurassic Rush. Jurassic Rush is literal carnage. 16 players, a race for survival, and, oh yeah, dinosaurs. Literal ones. Race to the finish as you avoid velociraptors, dilophosaurs, and more in this crazy player versus player competition. And that's not all they've added, as you can now stumble around as various dinosaurs, such as velociraptors, rexes, and the currently on sale mythical Dilophosaurus skin. Yes, you can finally become the menace that your teammates fear the most. Stumble Guys is free to play on basically everything, whether that's mobile, PC, Xbox, PlayStation, Switch, you name it. I invited Mrs. Rampy along to join some of my games, and she had a great time with me. So literally, there is no excuse not to jump back in and jump in on the prehistoric fun. Download Stumble Guys now using my link in the description, and let's see if you guys can survive the stomp. Thank you so much to Stumble Guys and the folks at Universal for sponsoring this video. That night, on the evening of day 5, something quite incredible was occurring. Broken Horn was being challenged to a fight by none other than a baby Triceratops. Quite incredibly though, Broken Horn ended up retreating from the fight, and thus handing the leadership of the herd over to this baby Triceratops. Quite how the rest of this herd would feel about a child that we now name Boss leading them would be very interesting to see. But back with our Spinosaurs, there was trouble in paradise. These two apex killers were vying for the alpha position, which would give them supreme right to local fish. In the end, after an epic battle between the two sides, it was Saily who came out in front, and would have priority access to the local fishing spots, which she was sure to make use of. The very next morning, we had a new creature to introduce to the ecosystem, the Parasaurolophus. Parasaurolophus was a large herbivorous dinosaur from the late Cretaceous known for its long hollow crest, which it likely used to make sounds and for display. It lived in North America, travelled in herds, and fed on plants using hundreds of teeth. Its unique crest structure made it one of the most recognisable and studied of the duck-billed dinosaurs. Soon after their arrival though, I was informed that one of our parasaurs had been diagnosed with a common cold. Apparently this was caused due to a lack of groundnut, so I made sure to add some of that in, as we didn't want our poor dinosaurs breaking out with common colds all over the place. The leader of this herd was Ruby. Ruby would be responsible for looking after the parasaur herd and making sure they didn't wander into too much danger. A bit like this poor parasaur was doing right here. Exploring a bit too far from the herd, this parasaur had not only endangered its life, but that of the entire herd, as she had inadvertently led Taily and Saily right to them. Taily in particular was not going to turn down the chance of a free meal, especially after losing the fishing rights, and the apex predator of our ecosystem had got its first kill. But there were much deadlier predators still to come later on. Our Spinosaurus had now taken control of what was the parasaur's territory, and it was clear that they were going to need some competition, or things were truly going to get out of hand. So I began to craft a new area called the Riverlands. I added some foliage and sand in to make our new incoming occupants happy, and then we were finally ready. The latest introduction was the Suchomimus, and these three were Stephen, Steve and Sam. Known for its long crocodile-like snout filled with conical teeth, Suchomimus lived in what is now Niger, Africa, and they likely hunted near rivers, using its strong arms and clawed hands to catch prey. Related to Spinosaurus, it had a small sail on its back, an adaptation suited for the semi-aquatic lifestyle. Stephen won the battle for the alpha of the Suchomimus gang, and buoyed by this, he had been given first dibs at checking out the nearby river for choice of fish. What Stephen didn't realise though, is that this area was already claimed. Somehow though, he didn't seem bothered about the much larger company of his larger cousin, and he was happy to eat right next to the Spinosaur. At first, the two apex predators ate from the same fish station, and it almost looked as if they were going to be happy to coexist. But when the fish began to run out, Taily made her move, following what she thought would be an easy kill. Yet this was not going to be an easy fight. Stephen was an especially strong Suchomimus, and the bite force between these two creatures were relatively similar. Whoever got the first bite off was going to be key, and shockwaves spread across the ecosystem as Taily was taken down by Stephen. I think we all need to send our respects to Taily in the comments below. As Saily discovered her fellow Spinosaur, she roared in rage. But outnumbered now 3-1, there was no doubt that the balance of power in this ecosystem had dramatically changed. Disappearing into the forest, it turns out that Saily had built a nest, and was soon hoping to have a family of her own. She had 2 eggs to look after, but when Stephen entered her nesting ground, she had no choice but to fight. In a bruising battle between the two apex predators of our ecosystem, both landed effective hits, but it would be Saily who would come out on top, revenging the death of Taily. Stephen may not have died on the spot, but as he slowly walked away, it would not be long until he succumbed to his injury. Taily and her future offspring would live to fight another day. Sam and Steve were unaware of what had just happened, as they were just casually chilling by the fish in the river, but quickly deserted the scene when Taily came running out of the trees. Unlike Stephen, they knew their place in this food chain. As day 10 loomed, the rain swept in for the first time in our ecosystem's life. The rain could last sometimes for days, and our creatures would have to strap themselves in. The arrival of the rain seemed like the perfect time to introduce another creature. This is the Carnotaurus. Carnotaurus was a fast, meat-eating dinosaur from the late Cretaceous, South America, known for its short snout, tiny arms, and distinctive horns above its eyes. It likely relied on speed and strong jaws to catch prey, though its bite may be more suited for quick slashing than bone crushing. Its name means meat-eating bull, reflecting its bull-like horns and predatory nature. I added some sand to keep our Carnos happy, but what might keep them even more happy was the flock of Gallimimus that seemed to be based nearby. These dinosaurs could run at speeds of up to 30 to 40 miles per hour, so the Carnotaurus would be better off ambushing them and engaging in a straight race. The storm was definitely agitating tempers between the Suchomimuses and the remaining Spinosaur. For now though, they held off on engaging, with both just having too much to lose. As the next day dawned and the rain finally eased off, our Titanosaurs had begun to begin a bit of a migration journey, in search of some new food and some new territory. So as I watched them move, I had to add some tall nut into their new territory of choice, which they had chosen. It was a pity for them though that this territory was also Carnotaurus territory. A Carnotaurus had little chance of taking down a fully grown Titanosaur, but this hungry Carnotaur latched onto the leg of this juvenile Titanosaur, most likely in the hope of inflicting injuries that would gradually kill this already starving juvenile. This time though, our Titanosaur had got away without serious injury, and the Carnotaurus' hopes of a big meal was over for now. Back in the Riverlands, tensions between Saley and Steve had finally bubbled over, and these two piscivores were fighting once more. After a bruising battle where both landed hits, it was Saley who inevitably came out on top, and Steve was fortunate to get away with only a small sliver of health left. However, after checking on Steve after the fight, I saw that he was suffering from internal bleeding, and it looked as if it was going to be a sad and slow death for one of our remaining Suchomimuses. Back in Carnotaurus land, the wandering Titanosaurs were still being harassed by our Carnotaurs, with the same juvenile being targeted now by multiple members of the pack. Eventually, a mix of bites and wounds turned out to actually be fatal for our poor starving Titanosaur, who collapsed to the ground. For our Carnotaurs, they may never get a bigger meal. And wherever we went in our ecosystem at the moment, it appeared that death was now inevitable. Steve had inevitably succumbed to his wounds, and Sam was now our last remaining Suchomimus. A species that started out so promisingly were now on the verge of extinction. But it appeared that the Carnotaurs were really going for the title of the menace of this ecosystem, as I found Horn the Carno with a dead Parasaurolophus munching away at the corpse. I then saw that the Carnos had entered the big lake area where the Triceratops herd were nesting. This was always going to end in a bloodbath, and it didn't take long for the Carnos to start picking off the poor young Triceratopses. I then found one of our Titanosaurs had actually starved to death, despite being surrounded by all of his favourite trees. Starving to death and being killed by Carnos was not doing the Titanosaur's reputation much good here. I decided to name one of the Carnos Menace, as this was the one who kept killing the Triceratops babies and biting at the ankles of the Titanosaurs, and this dinosaur proved to be a worthy bearer of this name, as Menace immediately attacked another Titanosaur, attempting to induce injuries, and then I caught him fighting one-on-one with an adult Triceratops a couple of minutes later. Normally this would not be a fight I would favour the Carno in, but Menace seemed to have something about him that made him untouchable, and the Triceratops ended up fleeing for its life. So I decided to stop the Carnotaurs from completely taking over the ecosystem, and it was time to add an even bigger predator into the mix. This is Marshall, a Tyrannosaurus rex, meant to bring order to our ecosystem. Unfortunately though, Marshall didn't seem too interested in protecting his arch nemesis the Triceratops, and instead he let the Carnos run absolute riot while he took a nap. Back at the Riverlands, our new Gallimimus gang had found their way there. This would be the ideal nesting ground for the species, away from the Carnotaurs in a space that once upon a time was ruled by the Suchomimus species. Those days were long gone now though, and as I admired our Gallimimuses, I was alerted to Menace attempting to take down the last remaining Suchomimus, Sam. Sam did his best, but there was only going to be one winner in this fight, and it was always going to be Menace. He had now wiped out the last of the Suchomimuses, and the first species of this ecosystem could now be declared extinct. And the Carnotaurs were not stopping there. They continued to claim more and more territory, even advancing into Spinoland, but at last there was some resistance. In a fight with a Triceratops, the first Carnotaur fell, proving that this species was not invincible after all. Titanosaurs decided to return to their old territories as the Carnotaurs backed off a little and actually decided to settle down and claim their very own territory for once, instead of taking other creatures. Back at Big Lake, life was returning to normality. The Parasaurs had begun to create their very own nesting ground, and soon many more would be expecting their own young. For Horn the Carnotaurus, he didn't even need to hunt for his next meal, as a bit of dinosaur cannibalism was on the cards. The Titanosaurs he walked past who were having a drink would be off the menu, for now at least. On day 25, it was time to start working on the next biome for our ecosystem. This place would be known as the Mountain, and will be home to a diverse section of new wildlife. But before we could add our first creatures to the mountain, back at the lake, the Carnos were once again running absolute havoc. They discovered this was prime Gallimimus territory, and they appeared to be their favourite snack. There was no doubt that the Carnos currently remained the dominant predator of our ecosystem. Along with the mountain, I decided it was time to get some aquatic creatures into our ecosystem, so I began the construction of our ecosystem lagoon. Soon it was ready to go, and I have to say as I looked at it, it looked absolutely glorious, and I was looking forward to see who would dominate the oceans. But first, it was time to release our first creatures into the mountains. I released a ton of Pteranodons, who immediately spread out across the mountains below, looking to establish some territory. Along with the Pteranodons, I released a pair of Thanos Dracons, whose name means Dragon of Death, and I probably also can't pronounce properly. It had an estimated wingspan of around 9 meters long, making it one of the largest known flying reptiles ever recorded. Apparently they got on very nicely with our resident Pteranodons, and thus would fit in beautifully in the mountains. Later that day, one of our Pteranodons wandered a little bit further than the rest, and suddenly found himself over the lagoon. This was not a place he wanted to be. Introducing Brute, the resident mosasaur of this ecosystem. For now, Brute was the undisputed king of the lagoon, alongside the ichthyosaurs that he had to keep him company, or to feed on. I named one of the ichthyes Boris, and then returned to land as Horn was fighting none other than Broken Horn, the former alpha of the Triceratops herd. Despite running away from a baby earlier in this ecosystem, Broken Horn proved that he was not to be messed with, as he sent Horn packing and running for his life. But down by the Riverlands, a mighty battle was brewing. In a rematch of Jurassic Park 3, Marshall the Tyrannosaur, who was brought in to try and weaken the Carnos, was instead taking on Saley, our remaining Spinosaur. Both landed blows in the fight, but despite its much superior bite force, our T-Rex was not able to land the killer blow, and ended up running from the fight, weak and with a damaged tooth. I then realised that our Titanosaurs were slowly dying of thirst, so I decided to add in a little lake next to them to make sure that this wouldn't happen anymore. I watched them have a quick drink before witnessing perhaps the biggest fight the ecosystem has seen yet. Menace had found a wounded Marshall, and knew this would be his best chance to remove him from the ecosystem forever. In a close fight, Marshall was simply too weak from the fight against the Spino to contend with Menace, and he fled for his life. He would have to make his own territory and heal up before trying to fight anything else. Not far from Big Lake, I decided to make a new biome in our ecosystem, known as Green Lake. Here we could introduce some new creatures, as our current biomes were already pretty stacked, and the first of these creatures was the Velociraptor. Led by their leader Blue, these Velociraptors were going to be a handful for any creature in the entire ecosystem. But nearby lurked a rival, the Atrociraptor. Atrociraptor was a small theropod dinosaur that lived about 70 million years ago during the late Cretaceous period in what is now Canada. It belonged to the Dromaeosaurid family, closely related to the Velociraptor, and had a short, powerful skull with sharp, serrated teeth. It used its speed and agility to hunt small prey, possibly in forested environments. But here in Green Lake, there was only one item on the menu, Velociraptor. To stop these two large packs running riot over my entire ecosystem, I placed down a singular feeder. This would draw in two groups of raptors, and at the end, one would remain standing. The next morning, I found that Menace was back to his old bag of tricks again, and I completed another successful hunt. But while one Carno was thriving, another one was, well, dying. Horn had passed away from the wounds of his battle with the Triceratops. Next to him, a pair of baby Triceratops played next to his dead body. But as one Carno fell, it did not stop Menace from continuing to live up to his name. He took down none other than Marshall, the Tyrant Lizard King. This was a brutal end for our Tyrannosaurus Rex, and he became the second creature to be declared officially extinct. Checking in on our flyers living in the mountain, they were all doing great. Most had found their way to the rivers nearby and were feeding on the ample supply of fish. For this poor Thanatos Dracon though, he sadly failed to locate the fish and passed away due to starvation. Back with our raptors, the Atrociraptors were fighting for alpha position, still not knowing that they were about to be in for the fight of their lives. As the Velociraptors gathered at the feeder, for the first time the two species of raptors locked eyes on each other, and an almighty battle began. In an even fight between the two species of raptors, both would land hits, and while the battle would end without fatality, the Atrociraptor had suffered a big injury, later revealed to be internal bleeding. The Velociraptors had definitely gone 1-0 up in this battle. After our Gallimimus numbers had been seriously reduced by Menace & Co., they had now moved into new territory, hoping that the presence of the nearby Triceratopses would help. But in the trees nearby, Saley was about to welcome to the world her offspring. This is Frank and Eric, and they are the latest additions to the ecosystem. Saley immediately brought them down to the nearby river to hunt for some fish, but for these baby Spinos, they would have to grow up fast, as this was a world full of dangers. One of these dangers was Menace the Carnotaurus, although after wandering off on his own, it finally started to pay a toll on him. He was starving and low health. It would take a miracle for our villain of the ecosystem to survive from here. Checking back in on our raptors, the Atrociraptor, who had been suffering with the internal bleeding, had now died from its wounds. Her death, however, was quickly avenged by Rick, the alpha of the Atrociraptors. and shortly after, Blue took down another one of the Velociraptors, and the true war was well and truly beginning. There seemed no doubt though that the Velociraptors were winning this one. As another Velociraptor was taken out, their numbers had dwindled all the way down to only 3 remaining. It may be time for them to leave this territory in the hopes of survival. Over at the Big Lake, Parasaur hatchling season had begun. It had been a rough season for our parasaurs, with many of our adults passing away due to various illness and diseases. This mother, however, lived to tell the tale, and welcomed in 5 babies to her nesting site. The herbivores had all formed what seemed like a big alliance at the Big Lake, where they would help to look out for each other and protect each other. Back with our raptors, however, as the final fight was dawning between the two species, it was once again the Velociraptors that took the win. The surviving Velociraptor, along with its 2 packmates, fled not only the scene, but the territory, finally submitting to the Velociraptors. It was a big win for our Velociraptors, who had claimed an area all to themselves, while for the Velociraptors, they would have to find a new territory and make a fresh start. However, even after this fresh start, Rick the Alpha died from his wounds of the battle. Only 2 Velociraptors remain now, and without their leader, the 2 remaining Velociraptors named Harry and Larry stared down the barrel of extinction. On day 50, marking the halfway point of this ecosystem's journey, the rains returned. As creatures prepared to hunker down and ride out the storm, our 2 remaining and now starving Velociraptors saw an opportunity for themselves. On the menu in the dark night was a Parasaurolophus. This was the kill that would potentially save their lives, and the feast would help them to recover from the trauma of the Velociraptors. Our 2 Velociraptors would live to fight another day. Menace had somehow also lived to fight another day, but once more he was in a bad way. Separated from his kind, he had contracted pneumonia and was once again needing a miracle to save his life. To mark day 50, it was time to introduce a new apex to the ecosystem. This is Darwin, an Indominus Rex, and the new king and things around here. For Darwin, everything was on the menu here. Everything, I should say, apart from his little minions, the Velociraptors. Darwin teamed up with the Velociraptors to create perhaps the most ferocious alliance that this ecosystem would ever see. No one would want to invade this territory. But Darwin was not the only hybrid creature to be introduced at the halfway mark. These are the Mutodons, and they wasted no time in messing about with one of them, killing a Velociraptor. This, however, would prove to be the wrong move, as in came Darwin. With the storm still raining throughout the night, Darwin fought the Mutodons throughout the night, suffering blows in the process. While he would end the night with 2 kills on a full stomach, he had suffered organ trauma from back-to-back fights. It would be an uphill battle for the newly introduced apex to even survive. And it appeared that the winds in our ecosystem were truly changing, as the next day the OG apex of our ecosystem, Menace, the Tyrannosaurus Rex Slayer himself, passed away due to illness. In the end, no creature was capable of taking out this insane Carnotaurus, and it would be nature himself that would have the final word. One of our OG species that did still appear to be thriving was the Triceratops. I named 2 of them, Josh and Jack, and then checked in on Darwin, who was still suffering with his organ trouble. And while Darwin slept, the Mutodons came to the party. These new hybrid creatures had completely turned the balance of this territory upside down. Still though, even a wounded Darwin would try to avenge the death of his precious minions that he had lost during the day. But as some of the raptors began to flee the territory, a seriously injured Darwin would become vulnerable himself. It would not be to the Mutodons though, as Darwin took the last of them out. For now, he would be able to rest in safety, but his recovery from his wounds was looking unlikely. On the northern side of the Big Lake, I began to work on a new biome, the swamp. I began to add in plenty of water in patches to make this biome as swampy as I could, and it was starting to come together pretty nicely. I couldn't resist checking in on Darwin though to see how he was doing, and he was not doing well. At half HP, Darwin was seriously on the decline, and even though he still had an appetite, even his kills were not helping him to regain any health at this point. So back to building a swamp I went, and after adding a ton of weeping willow trees, the biome had come together really nicely. Welcome to the swamp. With the new biome created, it was time to add a couple of new creatures, with the first of these being the Therizinosaurus. Therizinosaurus was a bizarre herbivorous theropod dinosaur known for its enormous 3-foot-long claws, the longest of any known land animal. Despite its fearsome appearance, it had a beak, a long neck, and likely feathers, living during the late Cretaceous period around 70 million years ago in what is now Mongolia. The second of these were the Dimetrodon. Dimetrodon was a sailback carnivorous synapsid that lived about 295 to 272 million years ago, long before the age of the dinosaurs. Its distinctive sail, formed by elongated spines on its back, may have helped with the thermoregulation or display. I named the king and queen of the swamp Kevin and Susie and left them in peace for now, as back at the Big Lake and Riverlands, baby Frank the Spino was already making quite the impact, scaring off a Triceratops. Not quite sure how he's pulled this one off. I guess the Triceratops just don't like killing babies. In the swamp once more, our Dimetrodons battle for supremacy, but the big news on day 60 was the death of Darwin, who had only lasted 10 days in our ecosystem. The Mutodons and Darwin had duly taken each other out, as life found a way to deal with the hybrid dinosaurs. For our 2 remaining Atrociraptors, there was trouble in paradise. A fight had broken out between Harry and Larry, and it ended up with both of them going their separate ways. A species already on the brink had now suffered another blow. But still, it appeared that the Atrociraptors were actually faring better than our Dimetrodons. In the swamp, Kevin and Susie had apparently decided they did not want to accept the Dimetrodons, and each of them took one of them out, with a singular swipe of their menacing claws. There was no doubt that they did not want to share their territory with anything at all. In the ocean, 2 giants were about to collide. This is Finn, the megalodon of our ecosystem, and for the first time he was about to cross paths with Brute, our mosasaur. As the 2 creatures swam towards each other, it was impossible to know the outcome. But for now, they both swam right past each other, as if the other didn't exist. Was this a permanent peace treaty, or just a temporary measure? In the swamp though, something incredible had happened. Despite thinking that all the Dimetrodons had been eliminated, it turns out that one of them had somehow survived the brutal Ferrozino onslaught. This species was actually no longer extinct, and would live to see another day in our lands. One species that had gone from barely surviving to now thriving was our Spinosaurs. Frank and Eric were now all grown up, and after losing their father before they were even born, there was no doubt that the Spinos had returned themselves to the top of the food chain. A quite incredible recovery from this semi-aquatic species. Kevin and Susie were certainly experiencing their ups and downs as they ruled the swamp, but in the mountains a new king had emerged. This is the Quetzalcoatlus, the largest flying animal to ever live. This late Cretaceous pterosaur likely soared over ancient North America and may have hunted small animals on land using its long neck and sharp beak. Here, in this ecosystem, it was going to be a threat not only in the skies, but on land also. It had been a little while since we'd introduced a good old-fashioned herbivore, so it's time to welcome this herd of stegosaurs to the Big Lake, along with their offspring. Stegosaurus was a herbivorous dinosaur from the late Jurassic period, known for its double row of large bony plates across its back, and a spiked tail called a phagomizer. Despite its massive body, it had a relatively small brain, about the size of a walnut, but you cannot underestimate that tail, capable of taking down even the biggest of predators. Alongside the stegosaurs, I also added some microceratuses, and of course I had to name one of them Dolores for obvious reasons if you've watched the latest Jurassic World movie. The Quetzals were taking no time in asserting dominance over the other creatures in this ecosystem, as they caught one of them taking down a pteranodon, and then just leaving the dead body in the water. It was clearly a power move to show that there was only one king of the skies in this ecosystem. It was now time to work on a new area, and this would be called Giga Hill. To no surprise, this territory would be the home of a pair of Giganotosauruses. Giganotosaurus was one of the largest known carnivorous dinosaurs, measuring up to 40 to 43 feet long and living in South America during the late Cretaceous period. It hunted large prey like sauropods and was a close relative of other giant theropods such as Carcharodontosaurus. I named the Giga twins Tyson and Rory, and they immediately went on the hunt. But the next fight didn't involve either of them. Instead, it was a herbivore-only fight, as the Stegosaurus and Triceratops were not getting along in such close proximity. However, in this war, it appeared that there was a clear winner, and while the first Triceratops was lucky to get away with his life, the second was not so lucky. The Stegosaurs had put a marker down that this was now their territory. After Harry and Larry had split up, a starving and desperate Larry ended up back in the remaining Velociraptor territory. This would prove to be a costly mistake, and it would cost him his life, leaving Harry as the remaining Atrociraptor. One species that was absolutely thriving though was the Parasaurolophuses. The baby parasaurs had now all grown up big and strong, and these creatures had overall done a really good job of keeping out of the way of predators. It was good to see that one of the herbivores was thriving in our ecosystem, but the same could not be said for our pteranodons, as one by one they were getting picked up by the newly dominant flyer introduced, the Quetzals. It was hard to see for this species how they could continue to survive around the mountains. In the lagoon, a battle of the titans was about to commence. The mosasaur v the megalodon, the one that we have all been waiting for. The mosasaur struck first, and for a moment it looked as if that would be all it took to take Finn the megalodon out. However, not only did Finn survive, but as he was circling back around, I realised that our mosasaur had somehow died. Not quite sure how Finn pulled this off, considering he looked like he was the one in trouble, but somehow he had successfully claimed the lagoon all to himself. The Triceratops continued to have a bad time in our ecosystem, as the emboldened Spinos powered by the newly adolescent additions terrorized creatures at the Big Lake, including the Titanosaurs as well. In desperation, our resident Triceratopses decided to migrate territory, in search of somewhere safer and more secure. It was unfortunate though that the territory they chose was already taken. Back at the Green Lake, it was time for some new additions, in the form of the Allosaurus. A territory not long before, ruled by a host of velociraptors and Darwin the Indominus Rex, was about to have a new apex predator to rule its roost. And it wasn't the only area that had fresh competition, as in the lagoon I sent in 3 Tylosaurs, who would provide competition for Finn the Megalodon. Back on land or in the skies perhaps, the Pteranodons were not finished yet, and despite being absolutely bullied by the Quetzals, they were still pulling some impressive punches, with this one taking out a full-grown Gallimimus with an incredibly impressive swoop attack. But back at the Big Lake, one Triceratops had refused to leave. Brokenhorn, the old leader of the Pride, had refused to give an inch, but after being nearly fatally hit by a Stegosaur, even the old proud male had to retreat. The Velociraptors were not thrilled by the addition of the Allosaurs. After outlasting the Mutodons and the Droceraptors, these poor Velociraptors seemingly couldn't catch a break. But for now, as this raptor took a break, there seemed to be some peace. I named up our resident Allosaurs, and by the time I'd done this, the peace treaty already appeared to be under threat. However, whenever these creatures squared off to each other, they seemed to retreat. Perhaps one reason for this is that this Velociraptor, who had only come to the Big Lake for a drink, led us right back to their nesting ground. Blue, the alpha of the pack, was still alive, and while she led and the offspring was on the way, the Velociraptors had hope that one day they could return to the top of this ecosystem. The brave raptor even decided to share the spoils of a kill with the Allosaurs and got away with it. They do say that fortune favours the bold. And for our raptors, they were about to be thrown another lifeline, as the next creature to be added into Green Lake would be the Struthiomimus, potentially on the menu for our Velociraptors. For poor Brokenhorn though, the game was up. He died in honour protecting the territory that he loved. The Pteranodons had now migrated into new territory after the onslaught from the Quetzals, and while that was Spino territory, there was plenty of time to steal their fish, while the Spinos slept. Although for this poor Pteranodon, he obviously didn't get the memo about the migration. His dead body fell into the middle of an epic battle between Tyson the Giganotosaurus and the Triceratops. With both landing successful hits, it was the Giga who was victorious. The Triceratops fled, and Tyson was happy to watch him leave. In the Green Lake though, the Raptors were finally making their move. They had played the peaceful card up until now, but when 2 Raptors saw a lone Allo all on his own, this was their opportunity. They leapt onto the Allo over and over in an attempt to take him down using their killing claw. However, when one Raptor was killed, Blue decided to retreat, as it was just too risky to continue. This Allosaur had done well to survive the onslaught, and the Raptor pack shrunk once more. The last remaining Trikes were taken out by the Stegosaurs at the Big Lake, as they claimed total control of that territory. For the migrated Triceratopses, life didn't appear to be much better. When a dead Triceratops body was found not too far from Rory, it was pretty clear that the Gigas were well on top of this fight. In the lagoon, it was time to introduce a new species. This is the Plesiosaurus. From the early Jurassic period, it was known for its long neck, small head, and 4 strong flippers used for swimming. It's also what most people think is the Loch Ness Monster to this day, even though I'm not sure that exists. Back with our raptors, they had finally struck a killer blow, as Jory the Allosaur was their first victim. For the Allosaur's, strength in numbers was important, as if they wandered around on their own, they were vulnerable to a raptor ambush. At Giga Mountain, there was a sad event of the extinction of a species. The Triceratops, a species that had once been so dominant in this ecosystem, had been completely wiped out. The Stegosaurs taking over their existing territory at the Big Lake, and then the Giganotosaurus brutality had made this species well and truly extinct. The raptors continued their onslaught, but this time the Allosaur stood strong, and not only survived but took down the 2 raptors in the process. With 2 raptors defeated, Blue was now the only surviving raptor, and she had chosen the much wiser task of taking down a Struthiomimus for her prey. When she returned to her eggs, she realised that she was now not only responsible for hers, but also the entire pack's future. On day 75, it was time to introduce a little bit of anarchy into the mix. Welcome to the Distortius Rex, also known as the D-Rex, and the final boss of this ecosystem. But more on him to come. As first in the swamp, a big encounter loomed, as Rory the Giganotosaurus chased a Gallimimus into the area and successfully got his kill. Nearby though, the old and wise Saley the Spinosaur loomed. Instead though, Frank stepped in to save his mother. Much younger than his original opponent, Rory decided to step back from this one. At the big lake that night though, a monster appeared from the shadows. Overnight, the D-Rex had committed what could only be described as a massacre. Not even eating the majority of the bodies, it was clear to see that he was killing for sport. But the morning did bring some good news. At the raptor hatchling ground, there was some life. Out of the raptor eggs hatched over a dozen baby raptors who were all healthy and strong. If they could keep their head down and with their Guardian Blue's help secure their territory, soon they would be an absolute force to be reckoned with. In the swamp, tensions were boiling over between two of the apex carnivores. Tyson had finally got Saley on her own, but despite her age, she was still fast and wise. The fight ended with no clear winner, but Tyson had suffered damage, as he would struggle to recover from organ trauma. Rory's arrival on the scene calmed things down for a little while, but Tyson did not live for much longer. 2 days later, he passed away from his wounds, and Rory knew that he was going to have to leave the swamp if he wanted to survive. After committing a massacre at the Big Lake a couple of days earlier, the D-Rex had now moved on to the Green Lake. But here he would not have it easy, as a massive pack of velociraptors had all grown up now, and unlike the Indominus, this thing would not be friends with them. In the swamp, Rory was finally driven away by Frank. The lone Giganotosaurus put up a good fight, but he left battered and bruised. The aftermath though revealed he was likely to suffer the same fate as his brother, organ trauma. Back with our D-Rex, he made the shortest work of an Allosaur I've ever seen a creature make of one, but upon seeing the size of the raptor pack he was dealing with, even he decided not to engage. But later that same day, the raptors did something despicable. Despite caring for them as babies and juveniles, Blue was overthrown as pack leader by one of the now grown-up baby raptors and forced out of the pack. After devoting her whole life to these creatures and their futures, she was once more on her own. Rory the last Giga had now passed away, and it marked the end of a rather successful end to the stay of our Gigas in this ecosystem. The Spinos, however, were continuing to thrive. It was time now to bring a bit of new life to Giga Hill. Welcome Terrence and Matilda, our Tyrannosaurus Rex duo. Hopefully these two fare a little bit better than Marshall did earlier on. On the outskirts of the swamp, Kevin and Susie continued to fight. It appeared that these two did not enjoy each other's company anymore, which sounds a bit like a pretty normal relationship, I suppose. In the end, Susie ran off, giving Kevin some time alone. Later that day, the D-Rex made it to the Riverlands and the outskirts of the swamp. Here he met Eric, who had never lost a fight in this ecosystem. However, even for Eric, the sheer size of the D-Rex was just too much for him, and he fled back towards the swamp. Unfortunately though, Eric did not make it back alive, as the D-Rex claimed its first huge victim of the ecosystem. As he feasted on the carcass, Harry the solo Atrociraptor walked by, somehow still surviving and even thriving. Terrence and Matilda were still also surviving over on Giga Hill, and at the bottom of it, they were set to have some new prey to feed on. This is the Ankylosaurus. Protected by bony plates and massive club-like tail used for defense, this would be no pushover for just about any predator. Of course, I did say just about any predator, as there may be some exceptions to that. Back in our lagoon, there was still one dominant force. Finn the Megalodon, after killing Brute the Mosasaur, was now taking out the new Tylosaurs. He clearly had no plan of relinquishing his position as the alpha of the seas. The D-Rex was slowly making his way into Anky territory, and was starting to make an impact taking out a couple of them, including a baby. This was not a very chilled out dinosaur, it appeared. It wasn't even a dinosaur really. Sadly, a second Quetzal did die to pneumonia. Perhaps dinosaurs can only survive close to the equator after all. That night though, a second massacre occurred. Waking up the next morning, I saw that the D-Rex had taken out the entire Anky squad. I had truly never seen anything like it. It was the Indominus Rex on steroids. However, after just introducing the Ankys, I realised this ecosystem had now got a bit out of control. The D-Rex was making a mockery of it, and going from biome for biome, killing for sport. Across the water though would be its biggest challenge yet, Terrence and Matilda. As Terrence squared up to the D-Rex, at first it looked promising as he got the first hit in, but one hit from this monster was all it took for Terrence to run, as he only had 20% of its health left. Next the D-Rex went right for Matilda, who also ran for the hills after taking just one hit from this thing. While Matilda would successfully escape, Terence would succumb to his wounds, and we were back down to one Tyrannosaurus Rex. It would be a sad end for Terence, who had done his best. I decided that we had one last chance to save this ecosystem, by introducing a monster that was just marginally less mad, the Indoraptor. This smaller version of the Indominus Rex was a ruthless killer, and while it looked like the D-Rex rolled on his back having the time of his life, Chuck the Indoraptor closed in on him. As the two faced off, the D-Rex dominated the early proceedings, and it looked like the same old story was about to repeat itself. But then something incredible happened. As Chuck jumped on and latched onto the D-Rex, it fell over in surprise, and due to its odd shape and size, it struggled to get back up. It turns out that even the most monstrous of creatures have a weakness, and Chuck had capitalised on it. An injured Chuck wandered into Velociraptor territory, where he laid eyes on the alpha of the pack. The same alpha who had chased out Blue from the pack was about to face some justice in the name of Chuck. Chuck brutally killed their leader and inserted himself as the new leader of the Velociraptor pack. With strength in numbers and Chuck leading, I think it was pretty clear who was the boss of this ecosystem. On day 100, the ecosystem had finally found some balance. After the massacre of the Green Lake and the Big Lake from the D-Rex, it rebuilt itself and once more became a thriving habitat for herbivores of all kinds. Matilda successfully recovered from her injuries and ruled Giga Mountain all on her own, and Blue and Harry, the lone raptors, continued to somehow survive against all odds. On the beaches of the coast lay a megalodon carcass that once ruled these oceans, but had suffered a mysterious death, while the Spinosaurs now roam the coast. As the Tylosaurs roam the ocean as the new apex predators, there is one thing for sure. These last 100 days has shown us that life will always find a way to surprise you. Hey there, I hope you all enjoyed my latest 100 Days Ecosystem video. Consider becoming a member of the channel for as little as £1.99 a month for early access to every single video and other perks. Don't forget to leave a like on the video if you did enjoy it, and of course subscribe if you haven't already. If you did like this video, make sure to check out my other ecosystems, or why not watch whatever YouTube video is on your screen now. I'm sure you'll love it. Thanks for watching all, and I'll see you guys in the next one.